Thank you all for being here. My name is Michael D'Agostino. I'm the House Chair of the General Law Committee, D91 Hamden. With me is the House Chair of the Judiciary Committee, Representative Steve Stafstrom, and the House Chair of the Finance Committee, Jason Rojas. We also have Juan Candelaria and Josh Elliott with us here today as well. We're here obviously to talk about the legalization of cannabis in Connecticut. And I know you all have some questions and we want to get right to them, but just a couple of words about process so you understand why we're here and doing it this way. Look, legalizing a substance that has been illegal for more than 80 years is a complicated process. And the way we approached it this year was to sort of divide that process into three main areas: regulation, decriminalization, and monetization. And so the three committees of the legislature with cognizance over those areas are the General Law Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and the Finance Committee. And so we've been working behind the scenes as chairs, with our Senate chairs, by the way, who could not be here today, and with our staff to work on a comprehensive bill that deals with the legalization of cannabis. But because of the procedure in the legislature, we could not just have one bill. So each of those committees of cognizance, General Law, Finance, Judiciary, are going to have their own bills that deal with those particular topics. Again, regulation, decriminalization, monetization. The bill that's been released today by the General Law Committee doesn't have a bill number yet. I expect that shortly. It's LCO number 6090, deals with the regulatory structure, the potential regulatory structure for the legalization of cannabis sales in Connecticut. The Judiciary Committee, and Representative Stafstrom will talk about that, this has its own bills out today as well, dealing with aspects of decriminalization. The Finance Committee does not have a bill out yet. They really have to wait and see what comes out of our committees before they do their final piece on taxation and other questions about the monetization of cannabis legalization. So that's the process that we've been following. And I want to stress one other thing that I hope you all will report, and I'm going to say it many times. This is just the start of the process. The bill from General Law you have before you today is just a draft. It is a first draft in a complicated and complex process. There will be things in that draft that advocates don't like. There will be things that are not in it that people want to see in it. This is the start of a conversation. The rest of the legislature hasn't seen these bills, except for the committees of cognizance. We want all the different caucuses to weigh in. We want the public to weigh in. And the Judiciary Committee and the General Law Committee will be coordinating public hearings next Friday. Judish will have their public hearing on their bills. We will have ours on our bill next Friday. We encourage everybody from the public and the advocate communities to come. Let us know your thoughts about the bill. This is the start of a process. It is a long way to June. At the end of the day, we expect these bills to evolve and then to be put together into a final, comprehensive bill on legalization that the legislature can take up. It is, again, the start of a process. This is not final language. I want to turn it over to the House Chair of Judiciary, Representative Steve Stafstrom, for any comments.
Thanks, Mike, and thank you all for being here. So, as Mike said, the Judiciary Committee has just filed three bills involving the legalization of recreational cannabis. The first and sort of the main bill actually is the vehicle which would legalize cannabis, would actually decriminalize up to 1.5 ounces of cannabis for someone over the age of 21. That bill also in it provides for the erasure of criminal records and a process for someone to go about getting their criminal record erased if they were previously convicted in our state for having under 1.5 ounces of marijuana. That application process would involve presenting a police report or signed affidavit under oath to a judge and asking for erasure of that record. The second bill that the Judiciary Committee has filed is one involving driving under the influence. Driving while impaired is already a a crime in our state and will continue to remain so for alcohol or for cannabis or any other controlled substance. But we've also added new offenses for driving under the influence for folks who may not be impaired but are smoking marijuana or ingesting marijuana while driving, and also for a passenger who is smoking marijuana or cannabis and could end up giving a contact high to somebody they're driving with. Also in that bill, we're providing provisions for both state and local law enforcement to get drug recognition experts trained to recognize the signs of driving while impaired. The final bill we've raised is one that makes clear that employers in the state of Connecticut do not have to make special accommodations for someone who shows up to work impaired and under the influence of cannabis. So with that, I will turn it over to the Finance Chairman, Jason Rojas, and then we will take some questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Certainly, that while there is a lot of interest on the revenue side of this public policy discussion, it's certainly a piece that comes later in the process because we can't move forward with taxation absent getting through general law in terms of having a regulatory structure and getting through judiciary in terms of dealing with the criminal aspect of legalized cannabis. But you can expect that similar with Massachusetts on the border and having a tax structure already in place, we want to be somewhat close to where Massachusetts is in terms of taxation and having an overall rate of about 20%. And there's different components to that overall rate, but certainly what we're looking at is having a tax scheme that would carry us for perhaps the first 2 or 3 years, so that we can really understand what the market is looking like once we do engage in legalized cannabis. And then after that, I think we'd reevaluate and perhaps look at a combined tax structure that would look at an excise tax as well as a sales tax, and certainly looking at a local option for communities that host various cultivation facilities or other cannabis-related facilities to levy their own sales tax at the local level. Again, looking at a 20% combined rate so that we're not competing with Massachusetts and not incentivizing people to go there and purchase their cannabis. So that'll probably come later in April. We'll let the other two committees do the work that they have to do to help us move along in the process, and we're looking forward to the discussion and being informed by what happens in both of those committees before we get to the Finance Committee.
Sir? I just want to thank my colleagues for all their work that they've been doing. A large part of this process, and especially since my colleague Mike D'Agostino is from Hamden with me, we talk often about this. He knows how important this has been to me personally, that the advocates have done such a good job of ensuring that their mark is on this bill that's coming out of general law. We are going to just reaffirm our promise that we're going to be listening to those who have been most affected by the drug laws over the past 80 or so years, because a large part of this bill is ensuring that there's equity moving forward. There is the financial component, but then there is also the recognizing who has been affected by the war on drugs component as well. And so a large part of what's coming out today is representative of the fact that we want to be acknowledging what sort of damage this has done to communities around Connecticut and around the country. So I just really want to press upon people that, as Mike said, this is an opening bid. There's a lot of language here, a lot to sift through, and nothing is set in stone, and we are going to continue listening to those out in the field who want to make sure that this is as thorough of a bill as possible. Thanks.
Questions? Question. That's probably a good transition to some of the substance of the general law bill that you've got before us, or the decriminalization bills. So we'll open it up.
Could you summarize a little?
Sorry, right here. So there'll be multiple licenses. What we're looking at. So we're going to start with the idea that you're going to have cultivators, growers, manufacturers, and a retail level. And on the cultivation level, for example, we're contemplating that the department or a commission that will be established through this bill will set out large, medium, and small growing facilities based on size. We're also going to not prohibit Connecticut farmers from getting into the act if they want to, again, subject to appropriate oversight and regulation. So you'll have that cultivation level of, again, various sizes. Then you'll have manufacturers, the people who take the actual leaf product and then extract the cannabinoid oils or THC and turn it into products, whether those be for smoking or for consumption. And then you've got the retail level for actual sale to consumers. And at each level, as Josh mentioned, we are embedding in this proposed bill various components to address what we call broadly equity. Equity applicants, people from areas disproportionately impacted by the drug wars, people with prior convictions for possession, will have an advantage and will be able to seek licenses 3 months in advance of anyone else, except for the existing cultivators or distribution facilities for a medical marijuana program, which also will be able to get into the Act initially under this scheme. Because, look, obviously, and I think most people know this, we have a very robust, highly regulated, incredibly well-run medical cannabis marketplace, and we want to leverage that and be able to use some of that and what that's in place now, but also then expand it for opportunities for everybody else. So those are the general license levels that we're talking about: cultivation, manufacture, and retail. You will be able to have a combined cultivation and manufacturing facility in the same location and be the same owner. We are going to prevent vertical integration, though. You cannot be a cultivator and own a retail facility. We wanted to prevent that kind of vertical integration, at least in this draft.
What about backyard growers?
So right now what the general law bill does is it asks the Cannabis Control Commission that would be established to study the possibility of home growth and make recommendations to the legislature with respect to that. Home grow is not allowed right off the bat by this bill. It is something we want to look at. And look, I want to address that. That is probably one of the main fault lines with respect to this law, whether we will allow people to grow in their backyard. There's a very powerful advocate community that thinks, hey, it's just like tomatoes and you should be able to grow that like you grow anything else. Others want to see that very regulated. We don't even know within our own caucus really how that issue plays out. We need to sort of digest some more information about it, how it would work. We're looking at least within the study proposal, allowing up to, I think, 12 plants. But it would not be allowed, at least in this draft right off the bat. I cannot say at the end of the day whether it will or will not be in there.
What about, you said cultivators couldn't have a retail establishment. Manufacturers?
Cultivators cannot have a retail establishment. Cannot have a retail establishment. There is a divorce there.
You can be a retailer, but you can't be a manufacturer.
Correct. You can have a combined cultivation manufacturing facility, which, by the way, is currently what our current producers are. They are combined facilities.
Mike, could you back up and explain again sorry, I was just trying to follow. You said there would be, when it comes to the licensing, an advantage that certain people would have. Could you explain that?
So if you are designated as an equity applicant, and we've got some definitions in here about being an equity applicant. If you are designated as an equity applicant, you will be able to submit your application 3 months in advance of the commission considering any other commercial applicants, again, with the exception of our current growers and dispensaries, since they've already really been through a process, although that's still subject to some regulations. So you will have a sort of a first mover advantage as an equity applicant.
A commercial applicant could be an applicant for
any of the 3 levels, correct.
And could you just give me a no pun intended, garden variety equity applicant?
I can tell you what it says. For example, some area disproportionately impacted by higher rates of arrest and conviction. That has to be sifted through a little bit more to a more finer point on it by the commission. A prior conviction for possession of cannabis. Somebody, again, we want to address, as Josh said, and I think all of us are of the same mindset here, that there's been a tremendous impact in the drug wars, a negative impact on communities, particularly communities of color, and we want to be able to address that in this bill with our equity applicant process and make sure that this industry is open, particularly to people who have been impacted by something that we are now making legal.
Representative Staffstrom, you spoke about allowing people to have convictions expunged. There are probably thousands of people, tens of thousands of people who applied for accelerated rehabilitation for marijuana-related offenses, and they've used their sort of, I guess, one strike.
Sure.
Any provision being made for that population?
Yeah, we don't currently have that in there. As you know, if somebody has gone through the drug education program or has used their AR and successfully completed that program, they don't have a criminal conviction on their record, and in fact, under Connecticut's law and Connecticut's erasure law, they can say they've never been arrested for a crime based on that. The one thing is you usually only get one bite at the apple, be it the drug education program or accelerated rehabilitation. We don't currently have a provision in here that would allow you a second bite into that program. What the erasure bill is primarily targeted at is folks who actually have a criminal conviction on their record for possession of controlled narcotics. And right now, under Connecticut law, if you were charged 10 years ago for possession of a controlled substance, that could have been marijuana, it could have been cocaine, it could have been heroin, it could have been any number of things. The system, the court operations system doesn't allow us to go in and just erase the marijuana convictions or the cannabis convictions, because there is no specific data of that in the system. It's just possession of a controlled substance. So someone would have, unfortunately, the only way to do this is for somebody to actually go and present either the original police report or an affidavit signed under penalty of perjury that says, 10 years ago I was arrested having 1 ounce of cannabis. I'd like my arrest record for that possession charge expunged or erased.
You got this set up on the Cannabis Commission that will be under the DCP. I think right now for the medical program, there's only about a half dozen people that work on this. How many more staff is this funding for? And I'm assuming that will this all be testing it, regulating it? I mean, I guess, how would that be broken up?
Yeah, it's a great question, George. Actually, we embedded in here actual staffing because we were concerned about what's happened with the medical program is, of course, that money's been taken and used in the general fund, and that there's been at least an argument that there's been understaffing for the medical program. So the specific language here in the draft statute says that the commission will be staffed, shall be staffed by an executive director, at least 2 employees who will handle applications, 2 that will assist applicants in the application process, 4 enforcement officers, and other staff as the commission may determine to hire. So we're actually embedding in here specific staff allocations, and then also included in here that the fees from the program will go toward funding the commission, so we don't have a lack of funding problem. Now, at the end of the day, obviously that's got to make it through the whole process, but we were very cognizant of the fact that we wanted to make sure that whatever we established here was going to be appropriately staffed to handle exactly what you're talking about: testing, regulation, oversight, enforcement, et cetera, to make sure there's appropriate staff to do that. Our current staff in the Drug Control Division and DCP do yeoman's work with respect to that program. They're going to need help once we expand, assuming we expand this. Just a follow-up, go ahead.
I was going to say, and do you know how long this could take to set up? I mean, is there any language in here right now as to how long it would take the commission to get set up, when we could, a start date, so to speak, if everything gets passed?
So another great question. No, there's no timeline set forth in here. It's going to take some time to set up that whole process. We're assuming that it will, maybe at least a year. I don't know. That's just based on experience in other states. But in order to address that, one thing that we did here at the end of the act is we said, I mentioned this earlier, we are enabling DCP to enact or propose immediate regulations that would need to be approved by the governor's office through that process that we currently have, to allow for the immediate sale through the existing infrastructure, the current growers, and on a temporary basis to get up and running. Well, actually, we think there's a great benefit to that, not only because it will enable consumers to start, buying and the revenue to come in, but also we'll be able to learn from that process, sort of on a test case scenario based on a robust infrastructure that we currently have. So we really like that idea of a transition period with our current growers and current distributors on a temporary basis until we get up and running, so that there's not this tremendous lag like you saw for, I think, at least 2 years in Massachusetts. So we wouldn't have that, again, leveraging our current infrastructure.
By the end of the year, potentially? I mean, if this goes through.
Well, if this goes through as soon as it passes, then as soon as those regs get in, you could certainly see before the end of the year with that current infrastructure, and hopefully not too far after that, to get a control group running up. There's another question in the back that I don't think we got. Yeah.
Regarding the equity applicants, will they get, in addition to getting first dibs on the licenses, will they get discounted licensing fees, things like that? And also, do you envision a commission or some type of a panel being set up to handle these equity issues and to serve as a liaison for people who want to get into it?
Yeah, also great questions. Yes, embedded in here at each stage we're talking about cultivation, manufacturing, retail, equity applicants. The direction in here is for the commission to establish a lower fee structure for the equity applicants. That's absolutely correct. I should note, just as an aside, I'll come back to this also, we are reducing, if not eliminating, fees on the medical side as well to make sure that the recreation program does not vitiate our medical program. So we're significantly reducing the fees for medical patients, if not eliminating them altogether in some instances. And we're also embedding in here the ability for medical patients to buy higher potency and higher and greater amounts. The second part of your question with respect to equity, right now, the commission that would be established is a 5-person commission by statute. 2 members of that commission, 2 commission members, must have at least 5 years of background in social justice or civil rights. So the assumption is, or our thinking is, that within the commission structure itself, there will be people on the commission devoted to those topics rather than a separate entity or side entity. But that's something that we can discuss as well, that I know is important to a lot of advocates.
Will you be looking to regulate the THC? The quantity?
Yes. So within here again is within the. So we already do that with the medical program. We're empowering the commission and DCP, the commissioner, to transfer over those regulations with respect to the levels that you can buy. Don't ask me the particular percentages off the top of my head. I don't know them, but that is exactly what we will be doing, as well as labeling, as well as the types of products. We're banning things that would appeal to children. There's language in here that would likely prevent, for example, gummies from being sold, because again, we want to make sure we've got a good balance of appropriate product availability, but also we want to try to balance out making sure that we're not appealing to children too much. So child-safe packaging is in here, is directed to be in here, things like that. With respect to the levels, as I mentioned, the key part in the level aspect is that you will be able to buy higher potency if you are a medical patient.
Is there a state that this is modeled after, or do you kind of take a little bit from all the states so far? I mean,
at least on the regulatory side, I can't speak for criminal because I think you guys are kind of on your own here. It's very sui generis in Connecticut on that side. But on the regulatory side, we looked at a number of states, Massachusetts, Colorado. Frankly, we jettisoned any reliance on the experience in California, which is kind of a free-for-all. But really, Colorado and their experience, especially the first few years with respect to packaging that they had issues with, the marijuana the commission that they set up in Massachusetts, we looked at that. We also got some very good input from different advocate groups who were sending us things. We looked at what they sent. While the governor's office didn't weigh in on this bill per se, we did ask DCP for some overall thoughts, the Department of Consumer Protection, and we included some of their thoughts in here as well.
And do other states have equity applicant setups? I mean, or is this something?
Massachusetts was a pioneer on that, but they felt like that and you probably can speak to this better than I can, but we felt like the Massachusetts experience, actually, they've had some problems while they wanted to encourage it. They didn't get the number of equity applicants that they thought they would get, so we tried to be a bit more aggressive in the equity proposals that we had. I don't know, Juan, if you want to address that at all in terms of some of the other pieces that other states have.
Yeah, also when we look at California, they have embedded some pieces in there. And when you look at the licensing structure, it makes it affordable for people or communities that have been impacted to really actually into the business, right? They have a combination of what they call like microbrewers, for example, where you can actually cultivate, process, and sell at the same time. So, but they're at a smallish scale, so that gives the opportunity for others to also enter the market.
That's actually just to follow up on that. So one of the things, while we're not allowing the micro businesses right off the bat, the commission is charged with studying the idea of an integrated micro business, small scale, vertically integrated business. We do want to look at that. We just felt we weren't prepared to put that in statute right off the bat. Again, this is something that at the end of the day could change. We shall see.
How robust is the medical marijuana production? Are you convinced that they can handle extra yet?
We are.
We've believe that.
We've been in constant contact with them. We've gone and visited the facilities.
Yeah, Curaleaf is doubling their production over the next year.
Yeah, we are very, and then we rely on DCP, of course, to tell us and they tell us that there's no shortage. I mean, we've heard anecdotally from some dispensaries who say that they can't get what they need, but when we've dug deeper into that, especially with DCP, who's the regulatory body, we don't think that there's an issue, and we're convinced that they can meet the immediate need. I think in the long term, though, we're going to need more. I do think that.
What about the issue of banking? This is like a cash economy. No one can bank. Judiciary, general law.
So we have in here at each level a requirement for each cultivator, manufacturer, retailer to use some sort of electronic verification system as the commission may approve. A number of them are being developed out there that allow for that kind of automatic banking. They're pretty good, and they work pretty well. And again, the experience of the current cultivators and dispensaries is that they've not had a problem with banking. So we don't anticipate that to continue to be a problem.
Can I
or to be a problem.
Representative Rojas, just to follow on the finance? Even though like Mike just said, the medical marijuana infrastructure in place can handle, or it's expected can handle the demand. How conservative are you going to be with the fiscal note, especially for the very first year? And what are you looking at for years 1 and 2?
Yeah, I think based on the experience of other states, they've all come in with a higher number on revenue, and I don't know that there's a state that's actually met their projected revenue number, so I think we need to be conservative. You know, there's a broad range of revenue estimates out there that have been put out by various groups that range from 66 million based on one tax structure up to 170. I think all of that remains to be seen, but until we have the regulatory structure in place and really tease out that 20% rate and exactly what it's going to look like, it's hard to predict exactly what it will be.
Fair to say in the first year of the biennium, you're not assuming anything though over.
Well, it all depends on if we're able to get our medical providers up and running and they're able to start engaging in sales. There's going to be some revenue number there.
Can I ask Juan another question, please? Sure. You're arguably a visionary here. You've been trying to drag these people into this for several years. I know it's broad brush at this point. What are you concerned about at this point?
My concern at this particular point, I think that first of all, I want to thank the committee chairs, right, because they're gonna listen to the different aspects. I want to ensure that the equity is a big piece in this legislation, but I also want to ensure that the dollars that are generated in this particular bill are reinvested in the communities, right? We always talk about prevention. We talk about addiction services. We need to ensure that dollars are actually spent in those areas, right? We want to ensure that children don't have access to it, because at the end of the day, you hear the argument, well, by passing this bill, you open the doors for children. Well, children have access to marijuana in our schools today. That's a fact. Our black market is about $350 million. That's a fact. If we do not do anything, who are reaping the benefits? Not our communities, but it is the drug lords and the cartels that are reaping the benefits. And as long as we have the equity piece in it, that is equitable for everyone, and that also our pricing is not, our taxing is not as high that we can actually compete with Massachusetts. New York will be the next state. We want to ensure that at the end of the day, when this is the law of the land, because that's how it's going to happen, that we are competitive and we're producing the best product in the market. That's our goal.
I only see House members up here. You guys,
Yeah, so
talking to your co-chairs.
yeah, we have Senator Winfield certainly would have been here. He's been a little under the weather, but he obviously sends his regards. And this was and Senator, go ahead. Senator Ferrero's weighed in. We've been meeting sort of as the chairs of the committees, and Senator Ferrero's been in those. And Senator Ferrero's here, so this is not a House product. This is a House and Senate product.
What would the zoning look like? I mean, is that up to each individual town, but would it be manufacturing, farming, retail?
We are, at least currently in here, we are still leaving a zoning decision up to local control. So if they don't want it, they don't have to have it. We want to have a conversation about that, though, because there's an argument to be made that if you just leave it to, again, the 169 towns in Connecticut, then maybe you have just a total concentration in the 91 corridor and maybe a couple other cities. And if you're out in the hinterlands, are you going to drive an hour and a half, or are you going to get it from your local drug dealer, or go across the border to Massachusetts? So we do want to have that conversation about zoning and whether or not we need to. I think probably the best way to approach this is what Jason said, which is incentivize towns to allow them to do some local taxing to get some revenue, to incentivize them to have it. But right now, local zoning would ultimately control. We're not going to impose a cultivation facility or a retail facility in a particular location.
And so Massachusetts, the tax rate is 20%?
Yeah,
Josh?
there's three components to it. There's a 10.75 retail's excise tax. Josh, you know,
Just went on a road trip.
I'll defer to Josh in a minute. There's a 10.75% excise tax at the retail level. They apply their 6.25% sales tax, and then the 3% tax local option.
We've all done varying degrees of research.
Yeah. Very degrees.
Johnson confirm or deny.
Some of us. Other questions? Thank you. Pretty good?
Thanks, everybody.